You're tired, not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from explaining yourself to people who were never going to understand anyway. Every conversation feels like a courtroom where you're simultaneously the defendant, the lawyer, and the evidence. You present your case with carefully chosen words, logical reasoning, emotional appeals only to watch your explanations dissolve into indifference or, worse, judgment that cuts deeper than before. This isn't weakness. This is the slow hemorrhaging of your life forced through a wound you didn't even know you had. Every time someone questions your choices, your emotions, your very way of being, you feel compelled to justify, to defend, to make them see. But here's what you haven't realized yet. Every explanation you offer is a piece of your power, handed over to someone who never deserved it in the first place. You've been conditioned to believe that being understood is your responsibility, that if someone can't grasp your decisions, your feelings, your path, then you must not be explaining it well enough. So you try harder, you use different words, different approaches, different emotional appeals. You dissect your motivations, lay bare your vulnerabilities, expose your reasoning like an open book, hoping that this time, this explanation will be the one that finally clicks. But it never does, because the problem was never your ability to explain. The problem is that you're trying to fill a void in others that they refuse to acknowledge exists. You're attempting to satisfy a hunger in people who feed on your need to be accepted, understood, validated. Every justification you offer is another meal for their insatiable appetite for control over your narrative. The weight of this realization should terrify you, but instead, it should liberate you, because once you see the game, you can stop playing it. Once you understand that your explanations aren't landing because they were never meant to land, you can stop throwing your energy into a bottomless pit. The healing you've been seeking doesn't require their understanding. It requires your courage to exist without it. Think about how much mental real estate you've surrendered to the court of public opinion inside your head. How many decisions you've second-guessed not because they felt wrong to you, but because you couldn't adequately explain them to others. How many dreams you've abandoned not because they weren't worth pursuing, but because the path couldn't be justified to people who never walked it themselves. This is the prison of endless justification, a cell built from your own words, locked with your own need for approval, guarded by your own fear of being misunderstood. And the most tragic part, the key has been in your hand all along. It's called silence, not the silence of defeat, but the silence of someone who no longer needs external validation to know their own truth. Every explanation you've ever given has been a negotiation with reality as filtered through someone else's limited perspective. You've been trying to translate your authentic experience into a language that others could digest, approve of, feel comfortable with. But authentic experience doesn't require translation. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't seek comfort. It seeks expression. And that expression is most powerful when it remains unexplained. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you start healing. Not because explanations are inherently wrong, but because the compulsive need to give them reveals a fundamental betrayal of your own authority. You are not on trial. Your life is not a thesis that requires defense. Your choices are not proposals that need approval. They are expressions of your deepest knowing. And that knowing is sacred to be subjected to the judgment of those who have never walked in your experience. Carl Jung understood something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The human psyche is far more complex and layered than any explanation could ever capture. When someone demands that you explain yourself, they're asking you to reduce the infinite mystery of your being into bite-sized pieces they can understand and categorize. But you are not a puzzle to be solved by others. You are not a problem to be understood. You are a living, breathing embodiment of consciousness exploring itself through your unique perspective. The healing begins when you stop betraying that consciousness for the comfort of others, when you stop diluting your truth to make it palatable, when you stop explaining the unexplainable and start living it instead. Because that's where your power lies, not in your ability to make others understand, but in your willingness to be yourself whether they understand or not. Jung recognized that every attempt to explain yourself to someone who fundamentally cannot or will not understand is actually a projection of their own inner conflict onto you. When someone cannot accept your choices without detailed justification, they're not really questioning you, they're wrestling with parts of themselves. They haven't yet learned to accept. Your unexplained authenticity becomes a mirror reflecting back their own unexpressed truths, their own suppressed desires, their own unlived possibilities. This is why your explanations never satisfy them. You're not dealing with genuine curiosity or caring concern. You're dealing with someone's unconscious need to keep you small enough to fit within their understanding of what's possible, acceptable, or appropriate. Your growth threatens their stagnation. Your courage highlights their fear. Your authenticity exposes their performance. Jung called this phenomenon projection, the unconscious process by which people attribute their own unacknowledged thoughts, feelings, and conflicts to others. When someone insists that you explain your unconventional choice, your emotional response, your different way of being, they're often trying to resolve their own internal tension about similar impulses they've suppressed in themselves. The person who questions your decision to leave a stable job to pursue your passion is often struggling with their own unexpressed dreams. The one who can't understand your emotional boundaries is typically someone who has never learned to set their own. The individual who demands justification for your lifestyle choices is frequently wrestling with their own desire for the same freedom you've claimed. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss: their inability to accept your choices without explanation is their psychological work to do, not yours. Their projections are their unconscious material to integrate, not your responsibility to manage. When you compulsively explain yourself to ease their discomfort, you're actually enabling their unconscious avoidance of their own growth work. This is the profound insight that changes everything. Their need for your explanations isn't really about you at all. It's about their relationship with the parts of themselves they've rejected, denied, or been too afraid to explore. You become the external representation of their internal conflict, and your willingness to explain yourself becomes their way of avoiding the much more challenging work of examining their own psyche. Understanding this doesn't make you bitter toward others, it makes you compassionate toward yourself. You realize that all those times you felt inadequate because your explanations didn't land. You were trying to solve a problem that wasn't yours to solve. You were attempting to heal wounds that existed in others, using words that could never reach the depth where true healing occurs. The people who truly belong in your life won't need extensive explanations to accept you. They'll recognize something authentic in your choices. Even if they don't fully understand them, they'll trust your judgment because they trust you. They'll support your path because they see how walking it lights you up from within. These people exist, but you'll never find them if you keep exhausting yourself trying to convert those who fundamentally cannot see you. Jung's concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've rejected or remain unconscious of, helps explain why some people react so strongly to your unexplained authenticity. Your willingness to be yourself without justification confronts them with their own suppressed desires for the same freedom. Your courage to live unexplained becomes a reminder of their own compromises, their own betrayals of their deeper truth. But that's their shadow work to do, not yours. Your work is to reclaim the energy you've been bleeding through unnecessary explanations and redirect it toward your own psychological wholeness. Silence, when consciously chosen, becomes a form of psychological alchemy. It's the transmutation of reactive energy into inner gold. Every time you feel the familiar urge to explain, justify, or defend yourself and choose silence instead, you're performing a sacred act of energy conservation. You're refusing to scatter your power across the landscape of others' understanding, and instead concentrating it within yourself. This isn't the silence of passive aggression or withdrawal. This is the silence of someone who has realized that their inner world is too precious to be subjected to external judgment. It's the silence of a person who understands that not everything needs to be shared, understood, or approved of to be valid and meaningful. True silence is not absence, it's presence. It's the full embodiment of your choices without the need to dilute them through explanation. When you master this kind of silence, you discover something extraordinary. You become more interesting, more respected, more magnetically powerful than you ever were when you were explaining yourself into exhaustion. People are drawn to what they cannot fully grasp or control. When you stop offering asterisk Detailed explanations for your choices. You become enigmatic rather than transparent. When you let your actions speak while your reasons remain your own, you create space for others to project their own meaning onto your mystery rather than having it all laid out for easy consumption and judgment. This silence becomes a sacred boundary that protects your psychic energy. Every explanation you withhold is energy you get to keep. Every justification you refuse to give is power you maintain for your own use. This conserved energy doesn't disappear. It gets redirected toward your own growth, your own clarity, your own deepening relationship with your authentic self. But mastering this silence requires tremendous courage, because it means being willing to disappoint people. It means accepting that some people will misunderstand you, project onto you, even reject you based on their inability to make sense of your unexplained choices. This is the price of psychological freedom, the willingness to be misunderstood, rather than betray your authentic self through compulsive explanation. The silence that heals isn't born from fear or avoidance, it's born from wholeness. It comes from knowing yourself so deeply that external validation becomes unnecessary. It emerges from a relationship with your own truth that's so solid that others' inability to understand it doesn't shake your foundation. This kind of silence creates what Jung would call a sacred container for your psychological development. Instead of constantly leaking your inner world through explanations, you create internal space for your thoughts, feelings, and insights to mature. You give your authentic self room to breathe, to develop, to become more fully itself without the interference of others' limited perspectives. Jung's process of individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming who you truly are, requires exactly this kind of protective silence. You cannot become your authentic self while simultaneously explaining that self to people who are invested in keeping you as you were. The two processes are fundamentally incompatible. Individuation demands that you disappoint the versions of you that others prefer. It requires that you outgrow the identities that made others comfortable, even if your growth makes them uncomfortable. This is not cruelty, this is psychological necessity. You cannot heal into your wholeness while remaining fragment-sized for others' convenience. The courage to disappoint is actually the courage to heal. Every time you choose your authentic path over others' expectations, you're choosing psychological integration over psychological fragmentation. Every time you refuse to explain away your growth to make others comfortable with your changes, you're choosing your individuation over their comfort. This doesn't mean you become callous or inconsiderate. It means you become boundaried and self-respectful. You begin to distinguish between the people who genuinely care about your well-being and those who simply want you to remain predictable and manageable. The former will celebrate your growth even when they don't understand it. The latter will demand explanations that no amount of words could ever satisfy. The people who truly love you want you to become more yourself, not less. They want you to grow into your fullest expression, even if that growth takes you beyond their current understanding. They trust your inner compass even when they can't see the destination you're moving toward. These are the people worth keeping close, not because they always understand you, but because they don't need to understand you to support you. Everyone else is asking you to betray your individuation process for their psychological comfort. They're asking you to stay small, predictable, and easily categorized so they don't have to confront their own unlived possibilities. Your willingness to disappoint these expectations is actually a gift to them, even though they won't recognize it immediately. You're modeling what it looks like to prioritize authentic self-expression over social approval. But the deepest courage required for individuation isn't the courage to disappoint others, it's the courage to disappoint the parts of yourself that have been seeking external validation. It's the willingness to let go of the version of yourself that needed to be understood and approved of by everyone you encounter. This inner disappointment is actually a form of grief. You're mourning the loss of the fantasy that everyone could love and understand you if you just explained yourself well enough. You're releasing the illusion that the right words could bridge any gap in understanding or acceptance. You're saying goodbye to the people-pleasing part of yourself that has been working overtime to maintain connection through explanation. But what emerges from this grief is something far more valuable: the unshakable knowing that you are whole and worthy without external confirmation. You discover that your value isn't dependent on others' ability to understand or approve of your choices, You realize that your authenticity is its own reward, regardless of who witnesses or validates it. Strategic opacity becomes one of your most powerful tools for maintaining psychological sovereignty. When you reveal everything about your thought processes, motivations, and decision-making criteria, you become predictable. Predictable people are easily managed, influenced, and controlled. But when you maintain some mystery around your inner world, you become someone others must approach with respect rather than assumption. This doesn't mean becoming secretive or dishonest. It means recognizing that not every thought needs to be shared, not every decision needs detailed justification, and not every emotion needs public explanation. Your inner world is your sanctuary, and like any sacred space, it requires boundaries to maintain its power and integrity. People respect what they cannot fully grasp or control. When you over-explain yourself, you hand others a roadmap to your psyche that they can use to predict, manipulate, or dismiss you. But when you maintain strategic opacity, you force others to approach you as a complete person rather than a puzzle they can solve and subsequently ignore. This opacity isn't about being distant or unavailable. It's about being selectively vulnerable. You share your inner world with people who have earned the right to understand you through their actions, not their demands. You open up to those who approach you with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, with respect rather than entitlement. The most profound relationships in your life will be with people who are intrigued by your complexity rather than threatened by it. They won't need you to explain away your mystery. They'll appreciate it as an essential part of who you are. They'll understand that depth cannot be reduced to simple explanations, and that trying to do so would diminish rather than enhance their understanding of you. When you master strategic opacity, you discover that silence is not empty space, it's potential energy. Every explanation you don't give is an invitation for others to engage with you more thoughtfully. Every justification you withhold is an opportunity for others to develop their own capacity for accepting what they don't fully understand. This creates more authentic relationships because people are relating to your wholeness rather than just the parts of you they can easily categorize and understand. They're engaging with your mystery as well as your transparency, your complexity as well as your clarity. This kind of relating is more challenging, but infinitely more rewarding than connections based on complete mutual understanding. You begin to attract people who are comfortable with ambiguity, who can love without needing to fully comprehend, who can support without needing to control. These are the people capable of witnessing your continued growth and evolution without needing you to justify each stage of your development. They become allies in your individuation rather than obstacles to it. The collective unconscious, as Jung described it, contains all the inherited patterns, beliefs, and expectations that society uses to keep individuals within acceptable boundaries. One of its most powerful tools is the demand for explanation and justification. The collective unconscious wants you to be understandable, predictable, and therefore manageable. When you compulsively explain yourself, you're unconsciously submitting to this collective pressure to be transparent and controllable. You're allowing the group mind to police your individual expression by making you justify your departure from collective norms. This is how the collective unconscious maintains its hold, not through force, but through your own internalized need for acceptance and understanding. Breaking free from this pattern requires recognizing when you're explaining yourself to serve the collective rather than to serve authentic communication. The difference is in the energy behind the explanation. Are you sharing your truth from a place of fullness and choice, or are you defending your truth from a place of fear and compulsion? Healing explanations come from overflow. You have so much clarity and joy about your path that sharing it feels natural and generous. Compulsive explanations come from deficit. You need others to understand and approve in order to feel okay about your choices. Learning to distinguish between these two motivations is crucial for breaking free from the collective unconscious trap. When you operate outside collective expectations without explanation, you're not being rebellious or antisocial, you're being individual. You're claiming your right to exist as a unique expression of consciousness rather than as a variation on collective themes. This individual expression is threatening to the collective unconscious because it demonstrates that its authority is not absolute, the more you heal into your authentic self, the less you need the collective's permission to be who you are. You stop seeking validation from the group mind and start operating from your own inner authority. This doesn't make you isolated or alienated, it makes you genuinely available for authentic connection with others who are also willing to be individuals, rather than mere representatives of collective programming. But this freedom comes with responsibility. When you no longer need collective approval, you must develop your own moral compass, your own decision-making criteria, your own standards for right and wrong. You can no longer rely on others' opinions to guide you. You must develop the capacity to guide yourself through the complex terrain of individual existence. This is why breaking free from the collective unconscious is both liberating and terrifying. It offers unprecedented freedom, but requires unprecedented responsibility. You get to be who you truly are, but you must figure out who that is without the collective's constant feedback and guidance. You must learn to trust your own inner knowing above the opinions of others. The people who have never done this inner work will continue to demand explanations from you, because your unexplained authenticity confronts them with their own unexamined compliance with collective expectations. Your freedom highlights their conformity. Your authenticity exposes their performance. Your individual path illuminates their collective programming. But their discomfort with your growth is not your problem to solve. Their inability to understand your choices without detailed explanation is not your failure, it's their invitation to develop their own capacity for accepting mystery, complexity, and individual expression. True healing occurs when you reach the psychological place where you can accept that not everyone will understand your path, and their misunderstanding no longer destabilizes your commitment to walking it. This acceptance isn't resignation, it's liberation. It frees you from the impossible task of making everyone comfortable with your growth and allows you to direct that energy toward actually growing. This acceptance is also profoundly compassionate, both toward yourself and others. You stop torturing yourself with the belief that the right explanation could bridge any gap in understanding. You also stop unconsciously demanding that others be different than they are. In order for you to feel okay about yourself, you allow them their limitations while claiming your freedom to transcend those same limitations in yourself. When you fully accept that misunderstanding is inevitable, you paradoxically become more understandable to those who are capable of understanding you. You stop over-explaining and diluting your truth, which allows it to come through more clearly. You stop defending and start embodying, which is infinitely more powerful than any explanation could ever be. This acceptance also creates emotional detachment from others' opinions without creating disconnection from others themselves. You can love people while remaining unattached to their ability to comprehend your choices. You can care about them while not needing their approval. You can maintain relationship while preserving your individual autonomy. The inner marriage between acceptance and detachment creates the foundation for emotional sovereignty. You become someone who can remain centered regardless of others' reactions to your unexplained authenticity. You develop the capacity to stay connected to your own truth even when surrounded by people who cannot or will not see it. This emotional sovereignty is what Jung would call psychological maturity. It's the ability to be fully yourself without needing constant external validation or approval. It's the capacity to make decisions based on your own inner knowing, rather than others' expectations or opinions. It's the freedom to grow and change without needing to justify each stage of your evolution. But this sovereignty isn't achieved through isolation or superiority. It's achieved through deep self-acceptance and the recognition that you are complete within yourself. You don't need others to understand you in order to understand yourself. You don't need their approval to approve of yourself. You don't need their permission to be who you are. When you reach this place of inner completeness, something magical happens. You stop attracting people who need you to explain yourself, and you start attracting people who appreciate your mystery. You stop drawing in those who want to control you through understanding, and you start connecting with those who can love you without needing to possess or manage you. The relationships that form from this place of sovereignty are entirely different from those built on mutual explanation and understanding. They're based on recognition rather than comprehension, on appreciation rather than analysis, on acceptance rather than approval. These relationships can weather the storms of individual growth and change because they're not dependent on maintaining a fixed understanding of each other. The sovereign self that emerges from this healing process is not cold, distant, or superior. It's warm, present, and deeply authentic. It's someone who has learned to love themselves enough to stop betraying their truth for others' comfort. It's a person who has developed the courage to be misunderstood rather than live a life that requires constant explanation. This sovereign self doesn't need to explain because its very being is explanation enough. When you heal deeply enough into your authentic nature, your presence becomes a statement that requires no justification. People sense something real in you that goes beyond words, something that can't be captured in explanations, but can be felt in every interaction. You discover that the most powerful communication happens without explanation. Your energy speaks. Before you do, your authenticity creates an atmosphere that others can sense immediately. Your groundedness in your own truth gives others permission to relax into their own truth, whether they fully understand yours or not. The people who are meant to be in your life will recognize something familiar in your unexplained authenticity. They'll see themselves reflected in your courage to be who you are without apology. They'll be drawn to the freedom you've claimed for yourself because it reminds them of the freedom they long to claim for themselves. And those who cannot appreciate your sovereign authenticity will naturally drift away, not because you've rejected them, but because you're no longer available for the kind of relationship that requires you to diminish yourself for their comfort. You become unavailable for connections that drain your energy through constant explanation and justification. This natural selection process isn't cruel, it's healing. It allows you to invest your relational energy in connections that nourish rather than deplete you. It creates space in your life for relationships that celebrate your growth rather than requiring you to defend it. It attracts people who are also committed to their own healing and growth rather than those who need you to remain fixed and explainable. When you stop explaining yourself, you don't become isolated, you become magnetic to your true tribe. You draw in the people who have been waiting for someone like you, someone who has claimed their right to exist authentically without explanation. You become a beacon for others who are ready to do their own healing work rather than demanding that you remain unhealed for their comfort. The ultimate realization is that healing doesn't require anyone else's understanding or approval. It only requires your commitment to your own truth and your courage to live it without explanation. When you reach this understanding, you discover that you already contain everything you need to be whole, happy, and free. Your healing journey is not a performance for others to evaluate or approve of. It's a sacred return to yourself, a coming home to the truth you've always carried, but may have forgotten in your attempts to make others comfortable with who you are. The moment you stop explaining this journey is the moment it accelerates beyond anything you thought possible. You are not required to make your growth comprehensible to others. You are not obligated to justify your healing to those who prefer you wounded. You are not responsible for managing others' discomfort with your transformation. Your only responsibility is to remain faithful to your own deepening understanding of who you are and why you're here. When you embody this truth completely, you become someone whose very existence is a quiet revolution. You demonstrate what it looks like to live from authentic self-authority rather than external validation. You show others that it's possible to be whole without explanation, powerful without justification, and free without permission. This is the deepest healing, becoming so aligned with your authentic self that explanation becomes unnecessary. Your life becomes its own statement. Your choice is their own justification. Your being its own explanation. You discover that the most profound truths cannot be explained anyway, they can only be lived, embodied, and expressed through the courageous act of being exactly who you are. In this space of unexplained authenticity, you find the peace you've been seeking through all those exhausting attempts to make others understand. You realize that understanding was never the goal, wholeness was, and wholeness, once achieved, requires no explanation from anyone, including yourself.